Let's bring in now for some more comment on the situation right now, and of course get an insight into the state of mind of President Zelensky, one of his top advisors, who's called Alexander Rodnyansky. Thank you very much, sir, for being with us. On this particular day, what are your feelings? And then after that, what are the feelings of the president? Can you give us some insight?
Yes, well, it's been a year. It's hard to believe that it's been a year. It felt like one moment ever since it began. So life is divided between, what happened before and after. Nobody could have believed a year ago. Many people wouldn't have believed that this would have been the reality, but it is. So now we're in it. We've been resilient. We've been defending our country, and we've been very successful in doing it. So that's the name of the game ever since then.
A soldier we spoke to yesterday who comes fresh from Bakhmut from the fighting there said that basically ammunition is what is needed. How can you, in your role, try to sort of somehow get the West to sort of provide more of that ammunition that soldiers badly need?
First and foremost, we're grateful for the support that we've been getting, military support, economic support, and primarily the military things that you've been asking about. We've been getting all sorts of equipment, but we need more. We need every tool at our disposal, every tool that the world has invented for us to be able to get the job done sooner rather than later, because everybody has to understand, and this is what we've been doing to convince the public, the politics, our partners, the sooner we can be victorious, the less costly it's going to be economically and obviously in terms of lives lost. So we need to have every single possible instrument that is out there for us to be able to be effective.
And that has been a consistent call from President Zelensky since day one. You know the moment when he said, "Yatut, I'm here," and wouldn't go into hiding. How significant was that, do you think?
It was very significant. It was a very strong signal at the time, and there was doubt all around, and there was just ambiguity about what would happen next, whether our leadership would, stay in place, whether it would be resilient and strong enough to sustain the pressure and obviously the Russian invasion. And President Zelensky came out saying, look, we're here, we're not going to go anywhere, we're going to defend our country, and we're going to be strong and we're going to be victorious. And he proved that he was right.
What is the difference in this conflict compared to, say, what happened in 2014? Why do you think there's been such a different response from the West, for instance?
That's a very interesting question. It's a complicated one to answer. I would say one of the reasons that the response has been different, and that this time it was unambiguous who was in the right and who was in the wrong, is that Ukraine had changed quite a bit. I mean, if you look back to 2014, when we toppled a corrupt and criminal government that was headed by Yanukovych and his cronies, it wasn't so clear to the world, who was really in the right and the wrong. Unfortunately, even though back then it was clear that Russia was in the wrong, no matter what. Now it's just so much more clear.
In terms of what happens next, of course, your specialist area is that of economics, reconstructing the country in that sense. Clearly there is so much damage that's been done. The estimate I saw was $138 billion worth of damage. You'd say it's a lot higher?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there's various estimates. Some of the numbers came even from last summer. The World Bank estimated there was $350 billion worth of damages and economic costs, direct and indirect costs of the war. If you look at some other estimates, what it would cost, for all of Ukraine to be modernized and essentially repaired and reconstructed, it's double that amount if you look at back to last summer. Now, a lot has passed since then. Some time has been gone, and obviously more destruction has happened. So now it's even more staggering. It's hard to get precise estimates, but these numbers are absolutely staggering.
And going back to what you were saying about corruption, it's one of the fears perhaps in some quarters that maybe that might be a problem in terms of what happens next in terms of the rebuilding. It's important really to clamp down on that.
Absolutely, and we've been very serious in terms of our attempts and our efforts to combat corruption, and you've seen more of that recently in the news. You saw several prominent cases where high officials were persecuted, have been detained even, and we're investigating corruption. We're taking that very seriously. We're making all sorts of progress in that dimension, in that area. We've established 5 institutions to combat corruption, various institutions that work in tandem. And so yes, I mean, Ukraine is not as free from corruption as Denmark is, of course, and that's not a secret. But we've been making progress, and we're nowhere near that point that we've been in 2014. So we've made some progress.
A war is going on. We're here in Kyiv, we're having a relatively calm time. We were talking about Bakhmut a bit earlier, where of course people aren't having a calm time. The Donbass, Kherson in the south, there are things happening on a day-to-day basis, Kharkiv as well. Yeah. Here in Kyiv today, schools, I understand, closed because of fear of a possible Russian missile strike. It's one thing to talk about relaunching the country, but when you still have that going on, it is incredibly difficult to plan.
Absolutely, and we still have to plan, we still have to start our recovery and reconstruction process somehow. And so the way we think about it is in phases, short term to medium term to long term. The short term phase is obviously, look, we need to the liberated areas, we need to get life going back. We need to rebuild the schools, rebuild the facilities, make sure that somehow life is resuscitated. Over the long run, obviously, that's after the war. We need to make sure that we get the investments, we have the institutions in place to guide the recovery and reconstruction efforts. And what we can do now is obviously shape those institutions, start preparing them, start, essentially building them up. And that's what we've been doing. And that's when the big sums of money, the big investment, that's when it's to be expected. Right now, we need a more limited amount to keep our government functioning.
Indeed, the G7 calling for more investment for Ukraine, more sanctions to be placed on Russia. Is that the right step, do you think?
Absolutely. Look, ultimately, the key to the end of this war lies in Russia, because that's where it originated. And what we need to do is we need to destabilize Russia. As frank as it sounds, but that's the truth. Because we need to get rid of this regime. We need to make sure that this regime does not have the facilities, the capabilities to focus on its foreign policy adventures as it sees fit. And that's what we need to do.
Emmanuel Macron says that it's never been, for instance, France's plan to ruin Russia, to defeat Russia, to crush Russia. It's not that situation. He says it never will be. But nonetheless, it sounds from what you're saying that there needs to be some kind of progression beyond just getting Russia out of Ukraine. Something else needs to be done.
Absolutely, because there is the eventuality, the possibility that even if we're going to be so successful in our counter-offensives that we liberate all of Ukraine proper, and there's no doubt where Crimea belongs as part of Ukraine, right? That if this regime continues to be there, remains intact, it's just going to keep bombarding us from its other borders, right? From our proper borders. So there's no guarantee that the war will end at that point. What will guarantee the end to the war is if we fundamentally change the Russian regime. And that's in the best interest of the Russian people themselves, because we need to put them on a development path that is more democratic somehow than what they've been on for the last 20 or however many years.
There have been a number of diplomatic developments. Obviously, Joe Biden coming to meet with Volodymyr Zelensky. We've seen China's foreign minister go to Moscow to meet with Vladimir Putin. Zelensky responded to that by saying he'd welcome a meeting with China. Do you think there's anything to be developed on that line? Do you think that any kind of Chinese peace plan has any realistic way of working?
Look, I think one big conclusion from all of this, or one aspect that you can take away, is that the world is getting tired, and even China is getting frustrated internally with this war dragging out for so long. It's becoming costlier to everyone, including other countries like China. So we welcome that sort of impulse, but that doesn't mean that we welcome the actual suggestions yet, right? We have to look at the details. We know there's questions as far as China's involvement is concerned. More recently, those have become more prominent. We've seen question marks about weapon supplies, other forms of support. That would be a huge mistake on the part of any potential ally that Russia might have. Because look, you have to be on the right side of history here.
Alexander, there are people, 200,000 people perhaps at one estimate, who a year ago, just over a year ago, were alive who are now dead. People who've been killed in this conflict. Do you understand how some people might say to you, look, let's get peace going in some way, shape or form. Let's just settle on what you have, except you're going to lose some land?
Look, we've heard this before, and the answer is very simple. That's not going to settle anything. It's going to freeze things, make things more costly, and worsen them in the medium to long run. Because the way Russia thinks about this currently with this regime is as follows. It thinks about it, if you want, as in the 18th century with the partition of Poland, when Poland was erased from the map of the world. And that took about 30 years, right? It took several decades. So Russia right now doesn't face any internal pressures, right? The regime has crushed any sort of opposition. It feels like it has all the time in the world, and it can take any amount of people, because it doesn't value human life, as we can see, to just send them here as cannon fodder and take as much time as they need to crush and erase Ukraine from the map of the earth, as happened with Poland in the 18th century. That's approximately the type of thinking that you have there. So you can't negotiate any sort of ceasefire or even go there, even if you wanted to. But that's a separate issue. For us, there's no question of where Crimea belongs. We have internationally recognized borders, and everybody recognizes those borders. So that's a whole separate issue.
You mentioned cannon fodder, that the idea of troops being just used to run at fire and die, basically dying to gain some ground. 790 Russians killed yesterday, which is a note from the Ukrainian armed forces. It is an astonishing figure, I think, for anybody to consider. Can I just move on now and ask you a final question about the year ahead? You're an advisor to the president of Ukraine. You're serving your country. Your thoughts, your words matter. What are your words to President Zelensky?
Look, I advise on financial and economic issues. My words are the same as all of our teams. I'm going to be here. There's no other place I want to be except for in my country in Kyiv. I'm going to be doing everything I can that's in my capacity to help us be victorious. And we have to be successful economically because everything holds together, everything at this point. The military aspect, the economic aspect. If something goes wrong, that's very bad news for us. So I'm going to be doing everything that I can.
Alexander Rodnyansky, thank you very much indeed for being with us, Presidential Advisor to the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. Here in Kyiv, as I was saying earlier, business as usual. It is a capital at war, but nonetheless the people are carrying on with their lives.